The rain drummed against the windshield of my beat-up Honda Civic as I pulled into the parking lot of Morrison & Associates law firm in downtown Chicago. October in the Midwest always felt like the world was washing itself clean before winter, but today it just felt cold and unforgiving. I sat there for a moment, watching the expensive cars around me. BMWs, Mercedes, even a Tesla that probably cost more than I'd made in the past 2 years combined. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Running late. Hope you at least wore something decent for once." I looked down at my black dress, the only one I owned that wasn't paint-splattered or frayed at the edges. It was simple. Maybe a little too simple for a family gathering where my sister would undoubtedly show up looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. But it was clean, and it was respectful, and that's what mattered when we were here to say goodbye to Uncle Robert. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending to Judgment Day. Uncle Robert had been the only family member who'd ever believed in my art, who'd hung my paintings in his study and bragged about his talented niece to anyone who'd listen. Now he was gone, and I was about to sit in a room full of relatives who saw me as the family disappointment. The law office smelled like leather and expensive cologne. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline stretched out like a concrete and steel testament to ambition and success. Everything I wasn't, according to most of my family. "Nick, there you are." My cousin Jennifer waved me over to where the family had gathered in the waiting area. She worked in marketing for some big pharmaceutical company and always treated me with the kind of forced politeness you'd give a homeless person you felt sorry for, but didn't want to get too close to. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "I'm managing," I said, taking a seat in one of the plush leather chairs. The truth was, I'd been crying on and off for weeks since Uncle Robert's funeral. He'd been more than an uncle to me. He'd been a mentor, a friend, the one person who understood why I chose paintbrushes over profit margins. That's when Madison swept in, and I do mean swept. My sister had this way of entering a room that made everyone else feel like background characters in her story. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, her tailored navy suit probably cost more than my rent, and her heels clicked against the marble floor with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted their place in the world. "Sorry I'm late," she announced to no one in particular, then spotted me. "Oh, Nick, I didn't see you there. That dress is interesting." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. Madison had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment by the time she was 12. Now, at 32, she wielded social awkwardness like a scalpel, making precise cuts that left you bleeding but not quite sure how deep the wound was. "Hello, Madison," I said, forcing a smile. "How's the consulting firm?" "Thriving. We just landed the Henderson account. You know, the tech startup that's about to go public? They're paying us more in consulting fees than most people make in 5 years. She settled into the chair next to me, crossing her legs with the practiced elegance of someone who'd never spilled paint on anything important. "And how's the art thing going?" The art thing? Like it was a hobby I'd picked up in my spare time instead of the career I'd been building for 8 years. "I'm working on a new series," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Urban landscapes with emotional undertones. I'm hoping to get them into the Morrison Gallery downtown." Madison's laugh was like ice cubes clinking in an expensive cocktail. "The Morrison Gallery? Isn't that the little place next to the coffee shop where college kids hang out? Nick, sweetie, when are you going to grow up and get a real job? Uncle Robert might have encouraged this fantasy of yours, but he's not here to enable you anymore." The words hit like a physical blow. Around us, our cousins and aunts shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. They never did. Madison was the success story, the golden child who'd graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, who'd built a consulting empire by the time she was 30, who lived in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. I was the dreamer, the one who'd wasted my college education on a fine arts degree, who lived in a studio apartment above a bakery and worked 3 part-time jobs to afford rent and canvas. "Actually, the Morrison Gallery has launched several artists' careers," I said quietly. "And I do have real jobs, 3 of them, in fact." "Oh, right. You mean waitressing at that little diner, walking dogs for rich people, and what's the 3rd one? House sitting?" Madison's voice carried just enough volume for everyone to hear. "Those aren't careers, Nick. Those are what people do when they're between real jobs." My face burned with embarrassment and anger. Yes, I walked dogs for a pet-sitting service. Yes, I worked weekends at Rosie's Diner on the South Side. And yes, I house-sat for people when they traveled, which helped me save on rent and gave me quiet spaces to paint. But those jobs paid my bills and gave me the flexibility to pursue my art. They were honest work, and I wasn't ashamed of them. Well, I wasn't supposed to be ashamed of them. "At least I'm following my passion," I said, hating how defensive I sounded. "Passion doesn't pay bills," Madison replied, checking her phone. "Passion doesn't buy health insurance or contribute to a 401k. Passion is a luxury for people who can afford to fail." Before I could respond, a tall man in an expensive suit appeared in the doorway. The Morrison family? I'm James Morrison, Robert Morrison's attorney. If you'd please follow me, we can begin. As we filed into the conference room, Madison leaned close to me. Just remember, Nick, Uncle Robert loved you, but he was also a practical man. He knew the difference between encouragement and enabling. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of that office and never see any of these people again. But Uncle Robert deserved better than that from me. So I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked into that conference room ready for whatever came next. What I wasn't ready for was how much my life was about to change. The conference room felt like a courtroom where I was about to be sentenced. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and a massive table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than my car. Through the windows, Lake Michigan stretched out gray and choppy under the October sky, matching my mood perfectly. Mr. Morrison, no relation to Uncle Robert, just an unfortunate coincidence that made this whole situation feel even more surreal, settled behind his desk with a thick folder and what looked like several sealed envelopes. He was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd overseen hundreds of these family dramas. "Please, everyone take a seat," he said, gesturing to the chairs arranged in a semicircle facing his desk. Madison immediately claimed the chair directly in front of the lawyer, crossing her legs and pulling out her phone to check messages one last time before the proceedings began. I found myself in the chair farthest from the desk, next to our cousin Tom, who worked in insurance and smelled like he'd had coffee and cigarettes for breakfast. "Before we begin," Mr. Morrison said, "I want to express my condolences to all of you. Robert Morrison was not just a client, but a friend, and I know how much he loved his family." A few people murmured their thanks, but the room felt heavy with anticipation. Uncle Robert had been successful. He'd owned a small chain of hardware stores across the Chicago suburbs and had never married or had children. Everyone knew there would be something to inherit, but the question was how much and who would get what. Robert was very specific about how he wanted his estate handled, the lawyer continued, opening the folder. He spent considerable time updating his will over the past few years, and he left detailed instructions about his wishes. Madison shifted in her chair, and I caught her exchanging a meaningful look with our cousin Jennifer. They probably figured they'd split the bulk of the estate between them, the two successful members of the family. I just hoped Uncle Robert had maybe left me something small, something personal that would help me remember him by. The estate includes the 3 hardware stores, which will continue to be operated by the current management team, Robert's home in Evanston, his investment portfolio, and various personal items. The total value is approximately $2.8 million. Someone behind me whistled softly. I felt sick to my stomach. That much money could change everything for any of us. For me, it would mean never having to worry about rent again, never having to choose between buying groceries and buying paint. But I also knew it would probably go to the people who, frankly, needed it least. Robert also left several personal letters to be distributed with the bequests, Mr. Morrison said, holding up the sealed envelopes. He was very clear that these letters were as important as the financial gifts themselves. He picked up the first document and cleared his throat. "To my dear family, I want you to know that every decision I've made regarding my estate reflects not just my love for you, but my hope for your futures. I've watched all of you grow into the people you are today, and I've tried to leave each of you something that will help you become the people you're meant to be." My heart was hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Uncle Robert had always been thoughtful, but this felt bigger than I'd expected. "I'll start with the smaller bequests and work up to the larger ones," Mr. Morrison said, and I felt my shoulders slump. Of course I'd be first. The throwaway bequest to the family disappointment. But then he said something that made the room spin around me. "To my beloved niece, Nicole Morrison, Nick, as she insists on being called, I leave the sum of $1 million, the house in Evanston, and all of its contents, including my study and the art collection housed there." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. $1 million. The house. His art collection, which I knew included several original pieces he'd collected over the years. "What?" Madison's voice cut through the silence like a blade. That has to be a mistake." Mr. Morrison looked up from the document, his expression neutral but firm. "There's no mistake. Would you like me to continue?" I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This wasn't possible. People like me didn't inherit millions of dollars. People like me scraped by and hoped for the best, and maybe, if they were lucky, got a small personal item to remember someone by. "But she's—" Madison started, then caught herself. But I knew what she was going to say. "She's nobody. She's the failure. She's the one who walks dogs and waits tables and paints pictures nobody wants to buy." I believe there's also a personal letter, Mr. Morrison said, handing me one of the sealed envelopes. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely take it. This is ridiculous, Madison said, her voice rising. She doesn't even have a stable job. She lives in a studio apartment. She can't handle that kind of responsibility. Madison, our Aunt Carol said quietly, but my sister was just getting started. Uncle Robert was clearly not thinking straight toward the end. He was sick. He was on medication. This will should be contested. Nick, you know this isn't right. You know you don't deserve this. The words hit me like physical blows. Around the room, I could see the family members looking at me with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed resentment. My cousin Jennifer's mouth was hanging open. Tom was staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. The will is valid and legally binding, Mr. Morrison said firmly. Robert Morrison was of sound mind when he executed this document, and it was witnessed by 3 independent parties. But Madison wasn't finished. She's an artist, she said, spitting the word like it was profanity. She doesn't understand money or investments or property management. She'll blow through $1 million in 2 years buying paint and canvas and living in some fantasy world where art actually matters. Each word was carefully chosen to hurt, and they found their mark. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, felt the familiar shame and inadequacy washing over me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't deserve this. Maybe Uncle Robert had made a mistake. To Madison Morrison, Mr. Morrison continued, his voice cutting through my sister's tirade, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my collection of antique tools from the hardware stores. The room went completely silent. $50,000. For the golden child, the success story, the one who everyone expected to inherit everything. Madison's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, disbelief, and then a cold fury that made me shrink back in my chair. 50,000? That's it? After everything I've accomplished? After all the times I visited him? After all the business advice I gave him over the years? The will is quite specific, Mr. Morrison said calmly. This is insane, Madison said, standing up so abruptly her chair rolled backward. She's going to waste it all. She doesn't have the first clue about financial responsibility. She's never owned property, never managed investments, never run a business. She's a child playing dress-up in the adult world. I wanted to stand up for myself, to tell her she was wrong, to point out that I'd been supporting myself for years, that I paid my bills on time and managed my finances just fine, even if I didn't have much to manage. But the words stuck in my throat, because part of me believed she was right. Furthermore, Mr. Morrison continued reading from Uncle Robert's letter, it is my express wish that Nick use this inheritance not just to secure her financial future, but to pursue her art with the dedication and freedom that talent like hers deserves. I've watched her struggle to balance survival with passion for too long, and I want her to finally have the chance to see what she can accomplish when she doesn't have to worry about rent. Now I was crying. Uncle Robert had understood. He'd seen what no one else in my family had bothered to see, that I wasn't lazy or irresponsible or living in a fantasy world. I was working harder than any of them knew, just to keep my dreams alive. This is a disaster, Madison said, grabbing her purse. When she's broke and homeless in 5 years, don't come crying to me. She stormed out of the conference room, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence, staring at me like I was a bomb that might go off at any moment. Mr. Morrison finished reading the rest of the will. Smaller bequests to cousins and family friends, charitable donations to local organizations. But all I could think about was the envelope in my hands and the weight of Uncle Robert's faith in me. As the meeting ended and people began to file out, I heard the whispers starting. Can you believe it? What was Robert thinking? She'll lose it all within a year. Maybe they were right. Maybe I would mess this up spectacularly. But as I sat alone in that conference room holding Uncle Robert's letter, I made a promise to myself and to his memory. I was going to prove them all wrong. I sat in my car in the law firm's parking garage for what felt like hours. Uncle Robert's letter unopened in my lap. The concrete walls around me felt like they were closing in, matching the weight of everything that had just happened. $1 million. A house. The accusation in Madison's eyes that I'd somehow manipulated or tricked our dying uncle. The letter was thick, maybe 3 or 4 pages, written in Uncle Robert's careful handwriting on his personal stationery. I'd recognize that writing anywhere. He used to send me birthday cards every year with long, encouraging messages about my art and my future. Finally, with shaking hands, I broke the seal. My dearest Nick, it began, and I could almost hear his voice in the words. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just had quite a shock in that stuffy law office. I imagine Madison didn't take the news well, and I'm sorry for that. But I want you to understand exactly why I made the choices I did. I wiped my eyes and continued reading. For 8 years, I've watched you struggle to keep your art alive while the world tried to convince you it didn't matter. I've seen you work jobs that exhausted you, live in places barely big enough for your easel, and still produce paintings that took my breath away. Do you remember the landscape you painted of Lincoln Park in winter? It's hanging in my study right now, and every morning when I have my coffee, I look at it and see not just snow and trees, but loneliness and hope, and the quiet beauty that most people walk right past. That's what artists do, Nick. You see what others miss, you feel what others can't express, and you translate it into something that makes the world a little less empty. Your sister is successful by conventional standards, and I'm proud of her for that. But Madison has never had to fight for anything that mattered to her. She's never had to choose between paying rent and buying the materials she needs to do what she loves. She's never had to defend her dreams to people who think dreams are luxuries for people who can afford to fail. You have, and you're still here. You're still painting. You're still believing in yourself even when no one else does. That kind of courage deserves to be rewarded. I had to stop reading because I was crying too hard to see the words. Uncle Robert had understood. He'd seen all the nights I'd worked double shifts at the diner, all the times I'd eaten ramen for a week so I could afford a new set of brushes, all the rejections from galleries that I'd never told anyone about because I couldn't bear to see the "I told you so" looks on my family's faces. The money isn't just a gift, Nick. It's an investment. I want you to use it to become the artist I know you can be. Take classes with the masters, travel to museums, set up a real studio where you can work without worrying about the noise bothering your neighbors. Most importantly, I want you to have the time and freedom to fail spectacularly and try again. The house in Evanston has a sunroom that faces north, perfect light for painting. I had it converted to a studio 3 years ago, hoping that someday you might want to use it. There's also a gallery space in the basement where I've been collecting work from local artists. I want you to turn it into something special. Maybe a place where struggling artists can show their work. Maybe a teaching space. Maybe something I haven't even thought of. You'll know what it needs to be. I know this inheritance will cause problems in the family. I know people will say you don't deserve it, that you'll waste it, that I was foolish for believing in dreams over practical concerns. But here's what I learned in 73 years on this earth. The things that matter most can't be measured in bank accounts or job titles or square footage. Your paintings matter, Nick. Your vision matters. The way you see beauty in broken things and hope in empty spaces, that matters more than all the consulting contracts and business deals in the world. Don't let them make you small. Don't let them convince you that security is more important than purpose. And don't let Madison's fear and jealousy poison this gift. Because that's what her anger is really about. Fear. Fear that maybe she's been measuring success wrong all these years. Fear that maybe the things she sacrificed to get where she is might have been worth keeping. Fear that maybe you were brave enough to choose a harder path because you knew it was the right one. Use this money wisely, but don't be afraid to use it boldly. Take risks. Make mistakes. Create something beautiful and wild and completely yours. And remember, you didn't steal this inheritance. You earned it every day for 28 years by being exactly who you are. With all my love and complete faith in your future, Uncle Robert. P.S. There's a key taped to the back of this letter. It opens the studio in the sunroom. I left something there for you. My hands were shaking as I felt around the back of the letter and found the small silver key. I sat there in my car, crying and laughing at the same time, feeling like Uncle Robert was right there with me, giving me permission to believe in myself the way he'd always believed in me. The drive to Evanston took 45 minutes through Chicago traffic, but it felt like I was traveling to another planet. I'd been to Uncle Robert's house plenty of times over the years, but never as the owner, never as someone who belonged there. The house was a beautiful old Victorian, painted pale yellow with white trim and surrounded by oak trees that were dropping their October leaves across the wide front porch. I'd always loved this house, the way it sat back from the street like it was keeping secrets, the stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns on the floors, the way every room felt like it had stories to tell. I let myself in with Uncle Robert's key and stood in the front hallway, breathing in the familiar smell of old wood and the lavender sachets he kept in the linen closets. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, except now it felt different. Now it was mine. The sunroom was at the back of the house, and I'd never really paid attention to it before. But when I opened the door, I gasped. It had been completely transformed into an artist's studio. The walls were lined with built-in storage for supplies. There were easels of different sizes positioned to catch the light, and the floor was covered with canvas drop cloths already splattered with paint. But what made me sink into the old armchair in the corner was what was hanging on the walls. My paintings. At least a dozen of them, professionally framed and arranged like they were in a gallery. The Lincoln Park winter scene he'd mentioned in his letter, but also others I'd given him over the years. or that he'd bought from me when I was desperate for grocery money. They looked different here, important and intentional, like they were meant to be seen. On the main easel was a canvas I'd never seen before, but I recognized the brushwork immediately. Uncle Robert had been painting. He'd never mentioned that he painted, but here was evidence. A still life of art supplies that was actually quite good, with a note attached that read, "I hope you don't mind that I borrowed your passion. It gave me such joy in my final months. R." I sat in that studio until the sun set, reading and rereading his letter, touching the brushes and paints he'd laid out like he was expecting me to start working at any moment. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. My phone had been buzzing all afternoon with calls and texts that I'd been ignoring, but finally I looked at them. Most were from family members, some offering congratulations that felt hollow, others making it clear they thought Uncle Robert had made a terrible mistake. But one text stopped me cold. It was from Madison. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family. Don't expect any of us to be there when you fail." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling the familiar hurt and doubt creeping in. But then I looked around at the studio Uncle Robert had created for me, at my paintings hanging on the walls like they mattered, at the key in my hand that represented not just a house but a future. Madison was wrong. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd been given a gift, not just money but permission to believe in myself, and I wasn't going to waste it. I pulled out my phone and typed back, "I'm not trying to destroy anything, Madison. I'm trying to build something beautiful." Then I turned off my phone, picked up a brush, and started to paint. Word traveled fast in our family, and by the next morning, my phone was exploding with calls and messages. I'd spent the night in Uncle Robert's house, my house now, though it still felt impossible to think of it that way, painting until my fingers were stiff and my back ached from leaning over the easel. For the first time in years, I'd painted without worrying about how much the canvas cost or whether I had enough paint to finish. But reality has a way of crashing back in, and it arrived in the form of a phone call from my mother at 7 in the morning. "Nicole Marie Morrison, what in God's name is going on?" Her voice was sharp with the particular brand of anxiety that meant family drama was spreading like wildfire through her social circles. "Good morning, Mom," I said, stretching the kinks out of my neck. I'd fallen asleep on the couch in the sunroom, surrounded by the smell of oil paint and turpentine. "Don't you good morning me." Madison called me at midnight, absolutely beside herself. "She says Robert left you everything and her practically nothing. She says you manipulated him somehow, got him to change his will when he was sick and confused." The accusation hit like a slap. "Mom, I'm not saying I believe her," she interrupted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But Nick, honey, you have to understand how this looks. You're the one who's been struggling, and suddenly you inherit a fortune? People are going to talk. People. Always people. The invisible jury of family friends and neighbors and acquaintances whose opinions somehow mattered more than the truth. Uncle Robert left me a letter explaining everything," I said. "He wanted me to have the resources to pursue my art without having to worry about survival." "Your art," she repeated, and I could hear her sighing on the other end of the line. "Nick, I love you, but you're 28 years old. At some point, you need to think about stability, about your future. $1 million sounds like a lot, but it won't last forever if you're not careful." "I know that, Mom. I'm not going to blow it all on paint and canvas. But what's your plan? Are you going to keep working at that diner? Are you going to get a real job now that you can afford to? Are you going to sell the house and invest the money properly?" Every question felt like another weight piling onto my chest. The assumption that I couldn't handle this, that I'd make bad decisions, that my first instinct would be to be irresponsible with Uncle Robert's gift. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I just found out yesterday. I need time to process everything." "Well, you better figure it out fast. Jennifer called this morning asking if it was true, and you know how she gossips. By tonight, everyone in the family is going to know, and they're all going to have opinions." After I hung up, I made coffee in Uncle Robert's kitchen, my kitchen, and tried to think clearly. The house felt enormous around me, full of rooms I hadn't even explored yet. How was I supposed to live in a place like this? I'd been happy in my studio apartment above the bakery, where everything I owned fit into 2 rooms, and the biggest decision I had to make was whether to splurge on the good coffee. Now I was supposed to figure out property taxes and utilities and maintenance for a house that was probably built before my grandparents were born. I was supposed to manage an investment portfolio and make smart financial decisions, and somehow prove to everyone that Uncle Robert hadn't made a mistake. My phone rang again. This time it was my boss at the diner. "Nick, it's Rosie. Listen, honey, I heard about your uncle's will from Jennifer's mom, and I just wanted to say congratulations." Rosie had been like a second mother to me for the past 3 years. She'd given me flexible hours when I needed them, had never complained when I showed up with paint under my fingernails, and had hung 2 of my paintings behind the counter where customers could see them. "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much her genuine happiness meant to me. "Now, I know you're probably thinking about your job here," she continued, "and I want you to know, whatever you decide is fine by me. But if you want my advice, don't make any big changes right away. Give yourself time to get used to everything before you start burning bridges." It was exactly what I needed to hear. Someone who wasn't questioning my judgment or assuming I'd make terrible decisions, just offering practical advice from someone who cared about me. "I think I'd like to keep working for a while," I said. "Maybe not as many hours, but I'm not ready to give up everything familiar." "Good girl. And Nick, don't let the family drama get to you. I've seen how hard you work, how dedicated you are to your art. Your uncle saw it too. That's why he did what he did." After we hung up, I decided to explore the house properly. I'd been there for family dinners and holiday gatherings, but I'd never really looked at it as a place where I might live. The basement gallery Uncle Robert had mentioned in his letter was incredible. He'd had the space professionally renovated, with track lighting and white walls and a small reception area with a desk and chairs. The walls were covered with paintings and photographs from local artists, some I recognized from coffee shops and small galleries around the city. There was even a small placard next to each piece with the artist's name and a brief biography. One wall was dedicated entirely to my work, pieces I'd done over the years that I'd either given him or sold to him when I was desperate for money. Seeing them displayed like this, professionally lit and properly framed, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to believe before. They were good. Not perfect, not gallery-ready maybe, but good. They had something to say, and they said it clearly. There was a guest book on the reception desk, filled with entries from people who'd apparently visited this private gallery over the years. "Robert's niece is incredibly talented," one entry read. "The emotional depth in her urban landscapes is remarkable." Another said, "I'd love to commission a piece from this artist. Does Robert have her contact information?" I'd had no idea. Uncle Robert had been quietly promoting my work, showing it to friends and visitors, building an audience I didn't even know existed. The thought made me laugh and cry at the same time. My phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "I suppose you think you've won something, but money doesn't buy talent and it doesn't buy respect. Everyone knows you don't deserve this." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar shame and self-doubt creeping in. But then I looked around at the gallery, at the evidence of Uncle Robert's faith in my work, at the guest book full of strangers who'd been moved by my paintings. Maybe Madison was right that I didn't deserve this inheritance in some cosmic sense. Maybe there were more practical, more obviously successful people who could have used the money better. But Uncle Robert had chosen me for a reason, and disrespecting that choice by doubting myself would be the real waste. I walked back upstairs to the studio and picked up the painting I'd started the night before, a view of the lake from the sunroom window, with the October light filtering through the oak trees. It wasn't finished, but it was alive with possibility. For the first time since the lawyer had read my name, I felt something other than overwhelming pressure. I felt excitement. I felt hope. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could live up to the faith Uncle Robert had placed in me. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows and sending more leaves spiraling down from the oak trees. Winter was coming, but inside the studio, surrounded by paints and possibility and the evidence of dreams that might actually come true, it felt like spring. 3 weeks after the will reading, I was finally starting to feel like I might survive this. I'd hired a financial advisor recommended by Mr. Morrison, opened new bank accounts, and started the process of transferring utilities and property taxes into my name. The practical stuff was overwhelming, but manageable with help. What wasn't manageable was the family situation. I was restocking supplies in the basement gallery when I heard the front doorbell ring. Through the window, I could see Madison's BMW in the driveway, and my stomach immediately knotted up. We hadn't spoken since her angry text 3 weeks ago, though I'd heard through the family grapevine that she was telling anyone who'd listen that I'd manipulated Uncle Robert and that the will should be contested. I opened the door to find not just Madison, but our cousin Jennifer and our Aunt Carol. They looked like a delegation, and not a friendly one. "We need to talk," Madison said, pushing past me into the front hallway. She looked around the house with barely concealed resentment, taking in the antique furniture and oil paintings like she was cataloging everything that should have been hers. "Hello to you too," I said, closing the door behind them. "Don't be smart," Jennifer said. "We're here because we're concerned about you." "Concerned about me or concerned about the money?" Madison's face flushed. "You see? This is exactly what we're talking about. 3 weeks of having money and you're already acting like you're better than the rest of us. I'm not acting like anything. I'm just tired of being treated like I committed a crime by inheriting from someone who loved me. Someone who was manipulated by you," Jennifer said. "Come on, Nick. You were the only one who visited him regularly toward the end. You had access. You had opportunity. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I stared at the three of them, family members who'd known me my entire life, and realized they actually believed it. They genuinely thought I was capable of manipulating a dying man for money. I visited him because I loved him, I said quietly. Because he was the only person in this family who ever believed in me. Because when everyone else was telling me to give up my dreams and get a real job, he was encouraging me to keep painting. Oh, please, Madison said, her voice dripping with disdain. You visited him because you knew he had money and no kids of his own. You saw an opportunity and you took it. That's not true. Really? Then explain this. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of Uncle Robert's living room. Jennifer took this picture at Christmas last year. Look at the mantle. I looked. There were framed photos of all the family members, but in the center, in the place of honor, was a photo of me at my art school graduation, Uncle Robert's arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. So you were clearly his favorite. You had influence over him. And now, conveniently, you're a millionaire and the rest of us get scraps. Aunt Carol, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke up. Nick, honey, we're not trying to attack you. But you have to admit, this whole situation is unusual. Robert was always fair with the family. It's hard to understand why he'd leave so much to one person, especially someone who... She trailed off. Someone who what? I asked, though I knew what she was going to say. Someone who's never shown much responsibility with money, she finished gently. You've been living paycheck to paycheck for years. You've never owned property or managed investments. It just seems like a lot to handle all at once. There it was. The real issue. Not that I'd manipulated Uncle Robert, but that I wasn't responsible enough, successful enough, grown up enough to deserve what he'd left me. I've been living paycheck to paycheck because I've been following my passion while working 3 jobs to support myself, I said. That's not irresponsibility. That's dedication. Dedication to what? Madison snapped. To a hobby? To a fantasy? Nick, you're almost 30 years old. When are you going to grow up and join the real world? This is the real world, I said, my voice rising. My paintings are real. The people who've bought them are real. The hours I've spent working and creating and trying to build something meaningful, that's all real. And how much money have you made from your paintings? Jennifer asked. In 8 years, how much? The question hit like a punch to the gut because I knew the answer, and it wasn't impressive by their standards. Maybe $15,000 total. Most of it from small sales to friends and family and the occasional piece sold at a coffee shop or local market. That's not the point, I said weakly. That's exactly the point, Madison said. You've made practically nothing from your career, and now you think $1 million is going to change that? You think money is going to magically make you a successful artist? Uncle Robert thought it might give me the chance to find out. Uncle Robert was a sentimental old man who confused encouragement with enabling, she shot back. And now his misguided generosity is going to ruin you. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of them. Not when they were already convinced I was weak and irresponsible. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of my house. All of you. Nick, please, Aunt Carol said. We're trying to help you. No, you're not. You're trying to make me feel guilty for something I didn't do and ashamed of something I shouldn't be ashamed of. You're trying to make me smaller, so you can feel better about your own choices. Madison's eyes narrowed. Our own choices? You mean our choice to be responsible adults with real careers and stable lives? I mean your choice to measure everything by money and status and what other people think. Your choice to play it safe instead of taking risks. Your choice to give up on dreams because dreams are scary and uncertain. Dreams don't pay bills, she said, repeating the same argument she'd made at the will reading. Neither does being miserable in a job you hate, I replied. But at least my struggles have been in service of something I believe in. The 3 of them exchanged looks, and I could see them making a decision. Madison straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in the gesture I remembered from childhood, the one that meant she was about to deliver a final blow. Fine, she said. If that's how you want to play this, then we're done. Don't come crying to us when you've blown through the money and you're back to waiting tables and living in studio apartments. Don't expect us to bail you out when reality finally catches up with you. I won't, I said. I'll manage just fine without your support, just like I always have. They left without another word, Madison's heels clicking angrily across the hardwood floors, the front door slamming behind them with enough force to rattle the windows. I stood in the empty hallway for a long time, shaking with anger and hurt, and something that might have been relief. The worst had happened. I'd lost my family's support, maybe permanently, but I was still standing. I was still here, in this beautiful house that Uncle Robert had left me, surrounded by evidence of his faith in my potential. My phone buzzed with a text from Rosie at the diner. Heard about the family drama through the grapevine. You okay, honey? I texted back, I think so. Can I pick up some extra shifts this week? I need to be around people who actually like me. Her response came immediately. Of course. And Nick, family isn't just blood. Sometimes the people who choose to love you matter more than the people who have to. I walked back down to the basement gallery and stood looking at my paintings on the wall, at the guest book full of strangers who'd been moved by my work, at the space Uncle Robert had created for local artists to show their work. Maybe Madison was right that I'd never make a fortune from my art. Maybe I'd always struggled to balance passion with practicality. But Uncle Robert had believed in something more than financial success. He'd believed in the value of seeing beauty in broken things, of translating emotion into color and light, of creating something that made the world a little less empty. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Morrison, the lawyer. I want to do something with the basement gallery, I told him. I want to turn it into a real space where emerging artists can show their work, maybe host classes, maybe have opening nights. I want to make it something Uncle Robert would be proud of. That sounds wonderful, Nick. Do you need help with the legal aspects? Probably. But first I need to figure out if I can actually pull this off. After we hung up, I walked back upstairs to the studio and picked up my brushes. Outside, the November wind was stripping the last leaves from the oak trees, but inside, surrounded by paint and possibility, I felt like I was finally ready to start building something beautiful, something that would prove, once and for all, that Uncle Robert's faith in me hadn't been misplaced. 6 months later, I stood in the basement of what had once been Uncle Robert's house, watching strangers admire paintings hanging on walls I'd repainted myself. The Morrison Gallery, named after my uncle, not the lawyer, was hosting its first official opening night, and the space was packed with people I'd never imagined would care about art. There was Mrs. Chen from the dry cleaners down the street, studying a mixed media piece about urban loneliness with the intensity of a museum curator. Tom, the mechanic who'd been fixing my Honda for 3 years, was deep in conversation with the artist about her use of recycled materials. Even Rosie had closed the diner early to be here, wearing her best dress and beaming like a proud mother. I can't believe you pulled this off, said Sarah, the artist whose work Tom was admiring. She was 23, fresh out of art school, and working 2 jobs while trying to get gallery representation. 3 months ago, she'd answered my Craigslist ad looking for emerging artists who needed exhibition space. I mean, I knew you were serious, but this... She gestured around the room, taking in the professional lighting I'd had installed, the wine and cheese reception I'd catered myself, the small crowd of people actually buying art. We'd sold 6 pieces so far tonight, more than I'd sold in my entire career. Uncle Robert always said the hardest part wasn't making good art, I said, watching a couple examine one of my own paintings, a new piece I'd finished just last week. It was finding people who were ready to see it. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of learning and growing and making mistakes. I'd kept my job at the diner, but cut back to part-time. I'd hired a financial advisor who'd helped me invest most of the inheritance conservatively while setting aside funds for the gallery renovation. I'd taken business classes at the community college, learning about marketing and event planning and basic accounting. Most importantly, I'd kept painting. Without the constant pressure of survival, my work had evolved in ways I'd never expected. The new pieces were bolder, more confident, more willing to take risks. Having security had given me permission to be vulnerable in my art, and the results were the best work I'd ever done. Nick! Rosie appeared at my elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. That nice couple by the window wants to commission a painting of their daughter's wedding venue, and the man in the blue suit is asking about art classes for his wife. I looked around the gallery, trying to take it all in. This was what Uncle Robert had envisioned. Not just a space for my art, but a community hub where creativity could flourish. We were hosting painting classes twice a week, had a monthly open mic night for poets and musicians, and were planning a summer program for kids from the local elementary school. There's someone here to see you, Rosie continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Over by the door. I turned and felt my stomach drop. Madison was standing near the entrance, looking uncomfortable and out of place in her expensive suit among the eclectic crowd of artists and neighbors and art lovers. She'd been looking around the gallery with an expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe. Or something that might have been respect. I excused myself and walked over to her, my heart hammering. Madison, I didn't expect to see you here. Mom made me come, she said, not meeting my eyes. She said I was being stubborn and that I should see what you'd done with the inheritance. And what do you think? She was quiet for a long moment, looking around the gallery. It's not what I expected, she admitted finally. When you said you wanted to do something with the basement, I thought you meant turn it into a studio or something. I didn't think you meant this. This was a thriving community space that was already booking events 3 months out, that had a waiting list of artists who wanted to exhibit, that was generating enough income to be self-sustaining within the year. I've been thinking about what you said, Madison continued, her voice softer than I'd heard it in months. About choosing to follow your passion instead of just playing it safe. About measuring success differently. Yeah? I've been at the consulting firm for 8 years now. I make good money, I have a nice apartment, I can afford pretty much anything I want. But I can't remember the last time I felt excited about anything. I can't remember the last time I created something that mattered to anyone. This was the most honest conversation we'd had since we were teenagers. I didn't want to push too hard and break whatever fragile truce we were building. What did you want to create? I asked. Before you decided it wasn't practical? She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the sister I'd grown up with instead of the successful stranger she'd become. You'll laugh. I wanted to write children's books. I had this whole series planned about a little girl who solved mysteries with her pet hamster. That sounds amazing. What happened to it? College happened, career counselors and internship opportunities, and the pressure to choose a major that would lead to a job that would lead to financial security. By the time I graduated, writing felt like a hobby for people who could afford to fail. It doesn't have to be, I said gently. You could start small, write in your spare time, see where it goes. Easy for you to say. You've got $1 million to fall back on. The old resentment was still there, but it felt different now. Less sharp, more like a bruise that was finally starting to heal. The money helped, I admitted. But it wasn't the money that made this work. It was believing that what I was doing mattered, even when no one else did. Uncle Robert's gift wasn't really the inheritance. It was permission to believe in myself. Madison looked around the gallery again, taking in the evidence of what belief and hard work could accomplish. I owe you an apology, she said finally. Several apologies, actually. I was angry and jealous, and I said things that were cruel and unfair. We both said things. No, this is on me. I was so focused on the money that I missed the point entirely. Uncle Robert didn't leave you his fortune because he thought you were irresponsible. He left it to you because he knew you were the only one brave enough to use it for something meaningful. I felt tears starting to form, but this time, they were good tears. I missed you, I said. I missed my sister. I missed you too. And I'm proud of you. This place, what you've built here, it's incredible. We were interrupted by a commotion near the back of the gallery. Sarah was standing next to her sold-out wall of paintings, crying happy tears while Mrs. Chen patted her shoulder, and Tom helped her carefully wrap the pieces for their new owners. That could be you someday, Madison said, watching the scene. Not the crying part, the part where people are fighting over your work because it moves them. It already is me, I said, pointing to the red sold dots next to 3 of my paintings. In small ways, maybe, but it's starting. As the evening wound down and the last visitors trickled out, I found myself alone in the gallery with the evidence of what Uncle Robert's faith had made possible. The walls were dotted with red stickers marking sold pieces. The guest book was full of contact information from people who wanted to take classes or attend future shows. And my pocket was full of business cards from people who wanted to commission work or collaborate on projects. But the best part wasn't the sales or the success. It was the community we'd built. Artists and neighbors and strangers who'd found something here that they couldn't find anywhere else. A place where creativity was valued and dreams were taken seriously. I pulled out my phone and called my financial advisor to give him the good news about our sales, then texted Rosie to thank her for all her help with the reception. As I was turning off the lights and locking up, I noticed Uncle Robert's portrait hanging near the entrance. A photo I'd had enlarged and framed, showing him in his workshop, surrounded by tools and wood shavings, smiling at something just outside the camera's view. Thank you, I whispered to the portrait, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself, for giving me the chance to prove that dreams aren't luxuries for people who can afford to fail. They're necessities for people who want to truly live. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first of the season, covering the oak trees and the front porch in a blanket of quiet possibility. Inside the house, my house, the studio was waiting with half-finished canvases and tubes of paint and all the time in the world to see what I could create next. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was excited to paint it,